the body was found where no one ever looked twice, behind the fertilizer warehouse, half a mile from the railroad spur, in a ditch that smelled permanently of rust and wet grain. At first glance, it looked like an industrial accident. A man in his 40s, no wallet, no witnesses. The coroner marked it as misadventure and moved on. That same morning, Harlan Whitmore trimmed his hedges with mathematical precision. Harlan was 48, thin, almost fragile-looking, with the posture of a man who tried to take up as little space as possible. He worked as a safety compliance inspector at the local paper mill, the kind of job no one remembered but everyone needed. His reports were meticulous. His voice was quiet. His neighbors described him as reliable. Lucia Whitmore was not from here. She never tried to hide it. Her Spanish-accented English cut cleanly through the small talk of the town library where she worked. She dressed too elegantly for a place like this. She smiled rarely, and when she did, it never reached her eyes. They had arrived in Fairvale, Indiana in 1966. No children, no close friends, no church. The first man died 3 weeks after Lucia learned he was living alone in a rented room above the old tavern. He drank heavily. He complained loudly. He trusted strangers too easily. Harlan invited him over under the pretense of discussing a temporary repair job. Lucia made coffee. The conversation stayed polite until it didn't. When it was over, the body was placed carefully into the trunk of Harlan's car, wrapped in a tarp borrowed from the mill. They drove at night. No panic, no argument. By sunrise, Fairvale had lost another invisible man. The first death taught them something important. The town did not want answers. No one reported the man missing. His landlord sold his belongings within a week. The police filed nothing. Lucia wrote his name on a slip of paper and burned it in the sink. The second killing came easier. This time, it was a woman, mid-30s, recently divorced, renting a trailer on the edge of town. Lucia met her through the library's adult literacy program. They talked about money, about fear, about starting over. The poison was mild. Industrial-grade solvent, diluted, poured into a bottle of cough syrup. The death certificate listed acute organ failure. The trailer was cleared out within days. By the third killing, they had a system. Harlan handled logistics, schedules, routes, disposal. Lucia chose the targets. She said it was about necessity, but Harlan knew better. She enjoyed the selection, the judgment. A factory drifter vanished next, then a seasonal farmhand. No bodies, no noise, just gaps where people used to be. It wasn't until the fifth death that something went wrong. A storm flooded the lowlands near the river. When the water receded, it revealed part of a leg, still wearing a work boot stamped with a mill supplier's logo. For the first time in years, Fairvale opened a real case. Detective Owen Ketter, recently transferred from Indianapolis, noticed the pattern immediately. Transient victims, no family, no follow-up, and one common detail: every last one of them had crossed paths with either the paper mill or the public library. The Whitmore house remained quiet. Too quiet. Detective Owen Ketter hated small towns for one simple reason. They believed coincidence was a personality trait. 5 missing or dead people over 4 years. All disposable in the eyes of Fairvale. But to Ketter, they formed a line too straight to ignore. Each victim had passed briefly through town systems. Temporary housing, mill labor, adult education classes. Places where names were written down, then forgotten. He started pulling records by hand, yellowed forms, smudged carbon copies. A librarian's signature appeared more than once. Lucia Whitmore. Clean handwriting. Consistent dates. Meanwhile, the Whitmore household began to fracture. Harlan noticed Lucia had started keeping things. A scarf, a wallet, a photograph folded too carefully. She called it documentation. Proof that they had existed. Proof that she had chosen correctly. Their fourth killing was rushed. A farmhand who had recognized Lucia from the library and waved too long in public. Harlan argued. Lucia insisted. The body was buried shallow, the ground frozen harder than expected. The fifth victim was meant to erase mistakes. A night watchman at the mill who drank alone and talked too much. Harlan arranged an accident involving faulty wiring and rain-soaked concrete. It almost worked, until the storm came. The river rose, soil shifted, and the boot surfaced. Ketter requested permission to treat the disappearances as a serial case. It was the first time the word had ever been spoken in Fairvale. He drew a map. Pins clustered closer than expected. All roads pointed toward one quiet street. The Whitmore home was painfully ordinary. White siding, trim lawn, no pets, no clutter. When Detective Ketter knocked, Harlan answered immediately, as if he had been standing behind the door. The interview was polite, almost pleasant. Lucia offered tea. She corrected Ketter's Spanish pronunciation without smiling. Their alibis aligned too neatly. What bothered Ketter was the smell, not rot, not chemicals, but something metallic beneath the polish. He returned days later with a warrant. The basement told the truth the living room had hidden. Behind a false wall were boxes labeled in careful handwriting. Inside them, shoes, eyeglasses, ID cards, scraps of clothing wrapped in newspaper, dated years apart. One box contained a notebook, dates, names, short evaluations written in Spanish. Lucia called it an archive. Harlan said nothing. They were arrested that afternoon. Lucia maintained composure, insisting the items were misunderstood. Harlan collapsed in the interrogation room after 12 hours without sleep. Forensic teams matched fibers to the boot from the river. Fingerprints sealed the timeline. By the end of the week, Fairvale's silence shattered. Headlines spread across the state. Library clerk and mill inspector arrested in serial killings. The town that never asked questions finally demanded answers. And it would get them in court. The trial began in early spring 1974 in a courthouse that had not seen national press in its entire history. The prosecution built the case slowly, brick by brick. Each item from the basement was cataloged, photographed, and connected to a missing person report. Fibers from Lucia's dresses matched clothing found near burial sites. Soil embedded in Harlan's trunk lining matched riverbank sediment. The most damning evidence was the notebook. Lucia's handwriting filled every page, dates, locations, short clinical notes describing each victim's risk, utility, and cost. The jury listened in silence as excerpts were read aloud. There was no rage in her words, no pleasure, only evaluation. Harlan testified on the fourth day. He spoke softly, barely audible, admitting to transportation, disposal, and planning. He described Lucia as the decision-maker, the strategist. When asked why he obeyed, he paused for nearly a minute. "I was afraid of becoming unnecessary," he said. Lucia took the stand last. She denied nothing. She corrected timelines. She challenged forensic conclusions with calm precision. When asked if she felt remorse, she replied, "Remorse is a luxury for people who believe they had choices." The jury deliberated for less than 9 hours. Both defendants were found guilty on 5 counts of first-degree murder. The sentence phase lasted 1 day. Death by electrocution was recommended for both. They were transferred to separate facilities. Harlan aged rapidly. Guards reported night terrors, shaking hands, long apologies whispered to no one. He requested visits from a prison chaplain and wrote letters that were never sent. Lucia adapted. She organized her cell with precision, taught Spanish to inmates, filed formal complaints about lighting and food quality. She never requested a visitor. She never wrote home. In 1978, Harlan was executed first. Witnesses described him as compliant, tearful, and relieved. His final statement was brief, an apology to the families and a request to be forgotten. Lucia's execution followed 14 months later. She declined a last meal. When asked for final words, she spoke clearly. History prefers simple stories. This was not one. The switch was thrown. Fairvale returned to quiet within a year. The house was demolished. The library replaced its staff. The mill updated its safety protocols. But records remained. And every few years, a new detective would study the case and come to the same conclusion. The most dangerous thing in a small town is not violence. It is how easily order can hide it. In the years that followed, Fairvale insisted on forgetting. The ditch behind the fertilizer warehouse was filled in. The riverbank was reinforced with concrete. The Whitmore house became an empty lot, then a parking space no one used for long. Children grew up hearing only fragments, rumors without names, crimes without faces. Officially, the case was closed, but the files remained intact. Detective Owen Ketter kept copies long after his transfer. He used the case as an example for young officers, not of brutality, but of patience. The killings had not been frantic. They had not been chaotic. They had been administrative. People disappeared because systems allowed them to. No one double-checked forms. No one followed up on missing renters. No one questioned a quiet man with neat reports or a librarian who smiled politely and wrote carefully. The victims were remembered only in court transcripts and evidence logs. Their belongings were returned to distant relatives or sold at state auctions. Some names were never claimed at all. Lucia Whitmore's notebook was sealed after the trial. Psychologists argued over it for years. Some called it a coping mechanism. Others called it ideology. One expert wrote simply, "She believed order was moral." Harlan Whitmore left behind nothing but records, work files, bank statements, a garage with labeled tools, no diary, no explanation, only compliance. Fairvale survived. It always does. But every decade, when a body is found too late or a missing person report gathers dust, someone inevitably references the Whitmore case. Not aloud, not officially, just as a reminder. Evil doesn't always arrive screaming. Sometimes it shows up early, works quietly, and leaves everything exactly where it found it, except the people.